We're about to get underway. If people have seats, my colleague has a brief and useful announcement to make.
Good evening, everyone. On behalf of Indigenous Studies, I want to just mention that we have a pine tree talk that's going to take place on Thursday night. It's entitled, What is Our Treaties? And Elder Doug Williams from Curve Lake and Dave Mowat from Alderville will be talking about the treaties of this area. So everyone is welcome to attend. It will take place from 7 to 9 at the gathering space in Zosky College, and I hope you'll be able to attend. Chi Miigwech.
Welcome to this evening's paper. It is the first of 4 papers in an annual series we put on in the Frost Centre for Canadian and Indigenous Studies. As I said, this is the first. There'll be another paper next week down at the Trail campus. 2 activists, one international lawyer and one activist, are going to come and talk about the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People, what our Prime Minister calls an aspirational document, which violates the Canadian Constitution. So as you can imagine, we'll see lots of progress on the declaration in Canada in the next, hopefully, very short period of time. After that, we have Ellen Gabriel from Oka, who's coming. Those of you who are old, like our Provo, and a few other people in the room, Ellen Gabriel was the spokesperson at Oka, the Mohawk in the Pines, if you remember that exciting event. And Ellen's going to come and talk about fracking and the Enbridge pipeline extension in eastern Canada. So the whole series looks at the juxtaposition of Aboriginal rights and resource development in Canada. The final paper will be given early in March by Peter Grant, who started, well, one of his first litigation forays was as one of the Delgamuth lawyers, and he will come and talk about the recent Supreme Court decisions which affect resource access, the Kuwaitan decision of this summer, and the Chilcotin decision. He was one of the main lawyers at the Chilcotin decision, so he'll come and wrap this series up. Tonight we have the first paper, of course, and a rather exciting event for Trent University. I think, and my colleague Professor McCaskill can correct me, this might be only the second time, Dawn, that we've had the national leader come. We had Matthew Kuhn come. We've had 4. All I remember is Matthew, because when Dawn introduced Matthew, he reminded him that he still owed Dawn an essay. Which from any of you who take a course from Dawn McCaskill know is de rigueur. That's how you do the courses. You owe him essays, which you eventually, of course, give him. I have a deep personal gratitude to Chief Bellegarde for putting Trent on what is, to say the least, an extremely busy and challenging calendar, particularly as he's just been elected, just over a month ago, I guess, and is madly catching up and developing his leadership agenda across the country. We want to start tonight with some traditional events, beginning with a prayer by our elder Shirley Williams.
You don't have to stand. You can just sit. The Lord will hear you. My name is Shirley Williams. I come from Wokomakong, Manitoulin Island, and I've been here so X number of years. As custom, I speak in Anishinaabe, and It's a custom that we use our own language when we speak to the Creator. So that's what I'm going to be using in Anishinaabe. Miigwech kishamana do. Kin kinage watoin man Peking. Miigwech newing the care 6 months the care. Mem de out ne care so wapnung, shawnung, epikishmak minogiwet nung. Miigwech and manana keb ne shiak minawesiak. Esaya in kinan mat mandasa ke. Miigwech and dikitame kinage woga mi jang minogiom the monks manda was abun. Miigwech and dikitame minamandasum bimatsuna minawam the monk. Miigwech mem de geo oshkak mikwe minanga dengi mi jang sa chitwane be. Pitch mnakwang jim quenamong. Chibinak sing young dinen winaning, winners chigishan among. Mina bimatsinaning nuyanang, winners such matsiang. Mina de enang, winners chizagidiang and svebeshikman peking. Minanga shamne doki wedgman, winners swish chigang man peking agego, was 6 months the king, nunga man pe, wanak magsiang. Ajen mishnang jamne do, jen mishnang. 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 So we are very Thanksgiving people. We always give Thanksgiving for our life and our light that we see today. We always give thanks to the 4 directions of the earth, and we name those. And we especially give thanks to the earth, the Mother Earth, the one that provides us water. To remember when we drink that water, we are cleansing our minds so that we can make good decisions. We also drink that water in order to purify that body so that we can carry and that spirit will walk with us. We also give thanksgiving also to cleanse our hearts so that we can love one another as human beings in this world today. So we say miigwech.
Thank you very much, Shirley. The Unity Singers at Trent have been kind enough to agree to come out tonight and sing an honor song for the chief.
Hey,
Thank you very much. I'd like now to call on Greg Cowie, Chief from the Hiawatha Reserve, and one of the many, many, many Coweries to, I would want to say darken the door of Trent University, but he didn't darken, none of them have darkened. They've lightened our way forward, as have students from Curve Lake and Alderville and the other communities about. He's here to welcome Gary to the territory. Thanks, Greg. This one worked, I don't know about
Okay.
that one.
Thank you, everyone. I'd like to acknowledge the drum and the song to bring us together and be of one mind, and to our elder for the prayer that she has blessed us with tonight. I'd just like to take a couple minutes and welcome National Chief Bellegarde into the Mississauga territory. I'm here tonight as one chief of 4 Mississauga nations in the area. Mississauga is a Scugog Island, Curve Lake First Nation, Alderville First Nation, and of course Hiawatha First Nation, where I'm from. So with that, I'd just like to welcome Perry into our territory and wish him well and safe travels. Here for sure he did, and back home to Ottawa, I'm not sure if it's tonight or not, and we're hoping he'll be able to spend some time in our community in the near future as well. So we'd like to showcase that to him and put that extended invitation out to him. So again, Perry, on behalf of the Mississauga nations of this area, welcome and enjoy your stay.
And finally, I will invite up Gary Boire, who's the Provost of Trent University, for a welcome to Perry. Sorry.
Bonjour, Ani, Tanzi, bonjour, good evening, and welcome everyone to this very special evening. Welcome to Trent University, to you, Chief Bellegarde, and welcome to you all to the university and to this first lecture of the 2015 North at Trent lecture series presented by the Frost Centre. I thought for a very long time about what to say, and I think I've got it. And that is, it is simply an incredibly deep honor to have as our first presenter in the Trent series, and it's an incredibly deep honor for me personally to welcome you, Chief, to Trent University. We look forward to hearing your talk tonight. So on behalf of the entire university and the local communities, I'd like to take this opportunity to officially welcome you to the university with a gift of appreciation, which I'll give to you now.
We have, because this is the university, we have classes scheduled. I can't believe that classes actually start at 8 o'clock at night. But then I found out it's a chemistry class, and I went no further in terms of trying to understand what the hell was going on. All I am really saying is that we're a bit squeezed for time. The idea is that once Perry speaks, we'll have some time set aside, we hope, for questions, and then one of the graduate students will present thanks on our behalf. Perry, I'm still stuck with the Provo. Perry Bellegarde is, in a sense, one of us. He was the first Treaty Indian to graduate with a degree in a Bachelor of Administration degree from the University of Regina. He then, in a sense, went home back to Little Black Bear, which is a Cree reserve, of course, in southern Saskatchewan, which is also known by many of us as God's country, and became chief and worked wonders. The band was under third-party management, and that didn't last very long after Gary took over. He then negotiated a multi-million-dollar compensation package. You did that legally, right? Yes. For First Nations veterans and their spouses. And my favorite, he negotiated a specific claim successfully to get the treaty lands where Treaty 4 was negotiated in 1874 returned to the First Nations people. It is now a site for annual powwows, the Treaty Days, and of course for a magnificent set of buildings, including his other major local achievement, which was the founding of the All Nations Healing Hospital in Fort Capel, which is a place you must visit. It's quite gorgeous and a place of considerable significance. He not only served his community, he moved on and did 2 separate terms as the lead chief, of the Federation Saskatchewan Indian Nations. That's his word, Indian, not mine. My students blame me whenever I use that word, so maybe in the question period you can get him to explain it. And of course, after that became national chief, having just begun his term. He wants to speak tonight about what is a possible future, a reconciled future between Canada and First Nations people across the country, based upon a real sharing of Canada, which was the original spirit of the Treaty Number 4. In Capel, Fort Capel, there are 2 statues to the treaty. One of them is a statue actually designed by the fellows who then went on and designed the legislative building in Regina, which has on the side of it the first paragraph from the treaty. On this day in 1874, Cree, Assiniboine, Saulteaux people came together with the Canadian government and gave up all their right, title, etc., and so forth to the territory. If you go down the street, there's another statue which says these people came together with the Canadian government on that day to share the land. And there's those sorts of miles of difference approach to the way in which we would share Canada with our Indigenous hosts. So that's what Perry has come to talk about, and I want to welcome him and say how thrilled we all are that he is here tonight.
Thanks, Dr. John. Thank you. Thanks, Dr. John Malloy and Provost and Chief. And I want to thank the Elder for the prayer and the singers for that beautiful song. And I was presented tobacco here earlier on today. So, ni stamina pix ko neo anapsisi, kakeo no temptik, no ako maganak, kinanaskom tinawaw, kakeo. Kiteyak, kinanaskom tin, from the heart, a big thank you. Okimakanak, kinanaskom tin, as well, from the heart, a big thank you. To my friends and relatives here, Uskayak, the youth, kinanaskom tinawaw, I thank you all for coming. Napayak, the young men, Iskoyak, the women, kakeo no temptik, my friends and relatives, I thank you all for coming here. And to share tonight some thoughts, some ideas, and some dialogue, and how we really work together as Indigenous peoples and non-Indigenous peoples, as Indians, as Natives, as Aboriginals, as Bill C-31, First Nations, Cree people, Niheoak people, Anishinaabe peoples, the Haudenosaunee peoples. We'll talk about terminology a little later. Because I used to do a lot of misconception training when I was at the Crown Investments Corporation of Saskatchewan, and I used to always hear it around the coffee machine. What should we call them? What should we call them? So we'll come back to terminology a little later. But we're people. And a very important thing, and just to comment again on the elders' teaching, you know, the importance of prayer and how we're all connected, because there's only one creator, and there's many roads to that creator. I would just encourage people to get on one, because it's really important. And the teachings from an Indigenous person's perspective, and she talked about the water and Mother Earth. And we always acknowledge in our prayers and thank the Creator for Mother Earth for sure, the 4 directions of 4 spirit beings and the 4 cardinal directions. We acknowledge Father Sky, Mother Earth, Grandfather Sun, Grandmother Moon, and the waters. You know, and the old people always say the water is so important because it gives life to our mother, just like the veins in your body carries life to your body. You need to keep the water clean, so the Mother Earth is clean. So she gives life to everybody, the same way as the veins in your body. That's a very important teaching. So I say, from the heart for that prayer. Tonight, I want to get back up a little bit here. And I always go past, present, future. And it's to give you a little bit of background why I'm here. as national chief. And I have a 100-day plan since I got elected December 10. And part of that plan is to reach out and educate people, decision makers, policy makers. And yes, we met with Thomas Mulcair and young Justin and Elizabeth May and Prime Minister Harper, met with the premiers, met with Premier Wynne yesterday, and lining up all the meetings. Very important. Meeting with key officials in the university, because you're going to eventually be policy and key decision makers here as well. And you're going to be leaders. And we're going to be calling on you to help make a difference and help bring about change. Because in Canada, I'm telling everybody, the status quo is just not acceptable. And what I mean by that is, and here's some statistics. Canada is a beautiful, rich country. And it's rated number 6th in terms of the United Nations Human Development Index quality of life. Way up here. You apply the same indices to indigenous peoples, we end up being 63rd. So there's a huge socioeconomic gap that exists in Canada in the year 2015. And so that's what we've got to work together to close. Because there's a huge cost to poverty, there's a huge cost to overcrowded housing, there's a huge cost to economic marginalization, and there's a huge cost of keeping First Nations uneducated in jails and in the healthcare system. And that's why we have to close this gap. And I'm going to be encouraging each and every one of you as undergrads, graduate students, is to open your mind and hearts to policies and new legislation, to embrace new concepts like what I'm going to be talking about tonight, which is really sharing and benefiting from the land and resource wealth together. And that's a new concept. I talked about it for 25, 30 years, about benefit sharing. Because in treaty territory where I'm from, it was all about peaceful coexistence and mutual respect between our peoples. And the same principle is here in this territory here, with the treaties here, that we're to mutually benefit from sharing the land and resource wealth together. And so embracing new concepts like resource revenue sharing is key. And so that's the premise of what I want, the seeds I want planted that will eventually grow with the Harpers, with the Mulcairs, with the Trudeaus, with the Elizabeth Mays, with all the premiers, and even with industry leaders. Because it'll close that gap. It'll help close that socioeconomic gap. Tonight, I want to go past, present, and future. And I want to talk about something that's very important. And I'm not going to just focus on Saskatchewan. No. Here's something that I do in terms of key events. And there might be constitutional lawyers, there might be people involved with the economy, there might be people just involved like, what's this First Nations guy talking about? But I always start with this timeline to show, when we talk about this concept a few years ago, we threw it out there to all the premiers and to different leaders. And there's one premier in particular, Premier Brad Wall, that said, no way. Remember that 2 or 3 years ago? There should be no resource revenue sharing in place. And so I quickly took up the challenge as Premier. These aren't just promises, political promises being made. There are constitutional obligations, there are historical obligations, there are legal obligations. So when, as First Nations people, we get up and say, hey, we still have an interest here, we still have a claim here, we're supposed to be sharing here, there is some substance to our argument. It's not just First Nations people saying, hey, this is Indian land. There's more to it than that. And so this timeline, I'm going to take some time to explain because it's very important. And I've always stated there's got to be education, there has to be awareness, that will lead to understanding, and hopefully that will lead to action. And that action will be policy and or legislative changes, any kind of new programmatic changes or whatever, or sharing the wealth, so to speak. And so for me, I always start with this thing called the doctrine of discovery. You guys heard that concept before? Some nodding of the heads? Yes? No? Yeah? Okay. It's been around for a while. But right now, there's a movement now, even within the United Nations, that starts to see and view that doctrine of discovery as an illegal and racist doctrine. In fact, the Pope He's even gone on record saying it really was illegal. If we get a chance to see this new Pope, pretty outgoing guy, eh, Pope Francis? We want him to redeclare it again. The papal bull is out there. It's null and void. Because Canada as a nation state still has not shown, to me anyway, the legal basis on which the Crown acquired title. So if they're using this doctrine of discovery, it's really becoming an illegal and racist doctrine. But that's where it's a starting point. And then this concept called terra nullius, a vacant land. A vacant land. Well, of course, we all know the land wasn't vacant. And I always say in a respectful way, in a most respectful way, especially in light of 2017 coming, and Canada is going to be celebrating 150 years as a country since 1867, the British North America Act. A vacant land, Canada founded on two founding nations, French and English. I don't understand that. When there are other indigenous nations here. In fact, there are over 58 different indigenous nations on Turtle Island. 58 different indigenous nations, 639 First Nations communities. So you've got 209 in British Columbia, you've got 47 in Alberta, you've got 74 in Saskatchewan, you've got 66 in Manitoba, 134 in Ontario, 45 in Quebec, 35 on the East Coast, 44 in NWT, and 14 in the Yukon. I know the numbers, man. I just ran for national chief, right? You know. Of those 639, in each of the territories, each of the provinces, why I say again, the importance of language and identity is very important. There's over 58 plus First Nations languages. And I learned a new thing. I thought, Wiki, Wifumakong, I always assumed it was Ojibwe. It's Odawa and Potawatomi. You know, I don't know if many people knew that. I didn't even know that. And there are different nations, different languages. Even the word Ottawa, where did that word come from? Odawa, you know. Canada, Kaneta, Mohawk, village, right? Manitoba, Manitoba, where the Creator sits in Ojibwe. Saskatchewan, fast-flowing water, Saskatchewan. So even the names, the provinces, come from indigenous languages. And I stress that is very important for us because it's identity. And it's so important. That's one of the things I want to keep pushing is the promotion and preservation enhancement of indigenous languages. Because studies have shown that once an indigenous person is fluent in their language by the time of 12, 13 years of age, they're more successful in school, more successful in life. They know who they are and where they come from. You know, I always throw out this once in a while. Oh, jak się masz? Дуже добре. Добрий день, студенти. Добрий день, поначитаю. It's Ukrainian. Because I was bused from Little Black Bear to a little Ukrainian school off the reserve. So I'm a Ukrainian. No, I was kidding. No. Big screen here on, I'm Cree now. I'm a Ukrainian. The importance of language. And Ukrainian is beautiful language, but that's from kindergarten to grade 9. I was bused to Goodeve, Saskatchewan, from Little Black Bear to Goodeve. And that's what I heard every morning. Was good day, students. Good dobre den studente. You know, and then I was, oh, dobre den ponachetio. Good day, teachers. You know. Anyway, I digress. Language is so important. And why I stress that, and I'll quickly make these two comments. Two things that really hurt the indigenous nations, that really hurt and put down our nationhood. One was the imposition of the residential school system. And you probably studied that. You know, the impacts of the residential schools, the intergenerational effects. That's a big thing that really killed our people, hurt our people. The other one was the imposition of the Indian Act in 1876. Between those two things, they brought down a proud nation, and they weakened it, and they starved it, and anything good about being a First Nations person was no good anymore. Your language, your ceremonies, your traditions, Your whole breakdown as an individual person, your family is broken down, your community is broken down, your nation's broken down, your hereditary system of selecting leaders is no good. You've got to implement the 2-year elective system under the Indian Act. On and on it goes. Again, I digress. Put that to the side. But those are the two things that really hurt. So back to the timeline. These are key things. I always start with the doctrine of discovery, terra nullius. Concepts that are being challenged now, both legally, and why I go through this timeline, I want to show people that there's a constitutional obligation and there are legal and moral obligations to deal with revenue sharing. 1763, Royal Proclamation. Very important document. The king, the crown, recognized First Nations title to land and territory. The first time. We didn't make this Royal Proclamation, the Crown did. And we recognized October 7th, last year, 250-year anniversary. We made an excursion. Professor John Malloy came with us, all the way to England, jolly old England. And yes, we had tea and crumpets at 4 o'clock with John. In England. We wanted to keep our connection to the Crown intact. And our relationship, because of that Royal Proclamation, is key. And that's the first time the Crown recognized First Nations title to land and territory. Very important. The Crown recognized that. 1867 BNA Act. Canada's Constitution, the British North America Act. Canada was a colony of Great Britain. But Section 9124 is key. The federal government is responsible for Indians. That's the word used. Indians and Indian lands. It doesn't say Indians on Indian lands. It says Indians and Indian lands. Further recognition of Indigenous peoples' title to territory and lands. 1870 Imperial Order and Council. Very important. Very important. This one is important because I want to go to the Imperial. Where is this 1870? Yeah, 1870. This is what it says. Upon the transference of the territories, the claims of the Indian tribes to compensation for lands required for the purpose of settlement will be considered and settled in conformity with the equitable principles which have uniformly governed the British Crown in its dealing with the Aborigines. Basically saying, when lands are taken up for settlement, this is the 1870 Royal Order and Council. These documents form part of Canada's Constitution. So basically saying, when lands are taken up for settlement, Aborigines, meaning us, were supposed to be dealt with, compensated on a fair and equitable basis. Very important piece. The 1870 Royal Order and Council. Okay? After the 1870 Order and Council, we go through the number treaties. And number treaty slide, I got to go to these slides here, number 9. Why this is important. In Treaty 4, where I'm from, the number treaties, they're sometimes called the Alexander Morris treaties. Alexander Morris was the Queen's Commissioner, the Crown's representative. John A. Macdonald, Prime Minister of Canada, said, hey, we have this Royal Proclamation. We recognize we don't have title to that land out west. We need a mechanism or something for the Crown to gain title. So he devised this concept called treaty making. And so he said, Alexander Morris, I'm going to pick you. You go out, meet with all those tribes and those nations out west. Make a deal, make a treaty. So Alexander Morris was the Queen's Commissioner, the Crown, representing the Crown. And he came out and met with Little Black Bear, he met with Powmaker, he met with Piepot, all our chiefs. So you ever wonder in our territory when, oh, I'm from Little Black Bear, or I'm from Piepot, or I'm from Powmaker, or I'm from Quakatus, or I'm from Daystar. The names of our reserves, our reservations, take on the name of the treaty signer sometimes. In 90% of the cases out in our territory. So when you say I'm from Little Black Bear, while little Blackbear was the chief that put his 4-direction mark on that parchment. And it was done in a very special way, because we always say that it's like a covenant with the Creator on top, and then the two people shaking hands. And I brought a medallion just to show what I mean, why we have a relationship with the crown. A treaty medallion. And this is important. The crown on one side, but the indigenous person, non-indigenous person shaking hands. The hatchet is buried. The sun is here, the water is here. And as long as the sun shines, the rivers flow and the grass grows. This treaty, Tepama, Tun, the big writing, will be in effect for generations now, generations in the future. Okay? And this is important. This was one of the things given to our chiefs. Silver medallions to the chiefs, bronze medallions to the headmen, the 4 headmen, annuities, $5. Big money. But annuity payments. The size of our reserves, 128 acres per individual, 625 per family of 5. A medicine chest at the house of the Indian agent in times of pestilence, sickness, and famine. Avocation of hunting, fishing, trapping. You'll be able to continue. All those are treaty promises. And our people would say, this much. We'll share. We'll share the depth of a plow with our brothers and sisters coming in. They want to farm. Namoyan seed. Namoyan surrender. Namoyan relinquish. We don't understand seed, surrender, relinquish clause here. Every elder I've talked to, every elder I've visited for the last 35, 40 years, and I really started at a young age, but their teachings were to share the land. This much, only this much, to share. Magigway umma, nothing underneath. And so, why I put this up here on Treaty 4, it was just to show the difference in interpretation. Because little Blackbear didn't understand French or English, but he spoke Cree and he spoke Assiniboine. So the written text of this, how was it explained to him in order to get him to put his X on that parchment? How was it explained? So the lawyers will interpret the treaty the legalistic way. Then our elders go by the spirit and intent interpretation of treaty. And so there's a difference. So this causes a point of contention. When all of our lives, ours is an oral history, we were taught we cannot give up Mother Earth, but we'll share this much. They want to farm. And that sharing principle goes across Turtle Island. Goes across Turtle Island. So this treaty point, this treaty number 4, here's the Williams Treaties. Again, the same thing. Go by your languages and your spirit and intent. You need 3 things, I always say, to understand treaty. You need the treaty itself, the written text, yes. But you need Alexander Morris's treaty book, because he made all of his points in a treaty book. But more importantly, you need the elders, the 3rd thing. The elders' oral history and evidence and testimony and their understanding of that. And then for me, when I go like this, I didn't learn it in the treaty. I didn't learn it in Alexander Morris's treaty book. It was by listening to old people. I'll call them elders, wisdom teachers. I can list, there's about 60 people. They're all passed on now. But they all said the same thing. Not only elders from Treaty 4, elders from Alberta on Treaty 7, the Blackfoot. In the north, Treaty 8, Treaty 10. All the numbers, the same thing. We were to share. We were to share. So that's, back up to the timeline, that's Treaty number 4, depth of a plow. The Indian Act, why I put that in there, is because all of our claims in this Indian Act, remember I said residential schools? The Indian position of the Indian Act, which is still here. I see some Anishinaabe people here. How many people have treaty cards? Oh? Okay. Okay. Show me your treaty card. Just bear it. This takes 2 minutes. Just show me the treaty card. And I'm going to make a point here. My friends, my relatives, I love you all, but this is not a treaty card. It's a status card, right? But we have become so colonized and indoctrinated to think our rights come from that Indian Act in 1876. A lot of our people call these treaty cards. Even back home, and I say, no, no, no. It's a status card. And you get this card, we get this card, not because of this treaty that was signed and consecrated nation to nation, not because of this holy, sacred covenant and this sanctity of contract over here. We've done it through ceremony when the newcomers came. We sat down and we had pipe ceremony, we had sweat lodge, we had sapaschagan, all these ceremonies for this covenant to be made. And our own people, we called on all of creation to come witness. All our grandmothers, our grandfathers, the spirit beings to come witness this agreement. That's why we say there's that sanctity of contract, that sacredness, that covenant with the Creator. This treaty is strong, up high. 1876, a federal piece of legislation was imposed. And it's a federal piece of legislation down here, which can be unilaterally changed tomorrow morning. Does that mean our treaty is gone? Does that mean our rights are gone? So I just use that to educate my relatives. Status cards, Indian Act. We have a long way to go to see that treaty honored and implemented. Because even this is key. When we start talking about citizenship and nationhood. And remember Bill C-31? If we stay under that Indian Act for membership, in 25, 30 years, there will no longer be any status Indians in Canada. Because we're generations, grandchildren not marrying status Indians, great-grandchildren not marrying, they're going to lose. They're going to lose. The chain will be broken under that Indian Act system. So we need to go back to nationhood in citizenship, but that's a whole another presentation. I got to come back over here. But the Indian Act. And why I put this in here was because the Indian Act, right up until 1951, it was illegal for an Indian to have access to a lawyer. This was right up until 1951, this clause in the Indian Act. So how could we stand up to challenge legalities for our resources and make a legal fight? Under the Indian Act, we weren't allowed to leave the reserve without a permit from the Indian agent. If we wanted to sell wood or kill a cow to eat, we have to get a permit from the Indian agent. Couldn't leave the res. Wanted to go date my Nitsimo sweetheart in the next reserve. Couldn't do that without a permit from the Indian agent. They controlled everything. Economic marginalization, all part of that. No access to legal counsel. Couldn't even get legal advice. So that Indian Act really controlled us. It controlled every aspect of our lives. Even to the point now when we try to create our own laws. Some of our people back home, did you check with the minister? Did you check with Indian Affairs? And say, don't have to. If you want to exert your sovereignty in nationhood and jurisdiction. So that, again, that's another presentation. But back to the Indian Act, I put this one in here just to make that point on that timeline. Why it was difficult to really get things going. Because of this Indian Act. Okay? I put these ones here. But Ontario, Quebec, and New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, the 4 founding provinces, and then a little patch bark in Manitoba. For us out west, Saskatchewan became part of Confederation in 1905, along with Alberta. Why I put that in there? Because we always have a dialogue debate. Who's responsible for treaty Indians, Indigenous peoples? Federal government, provincial government? Which one? Who has jurisdiction over the land and resources? Federal fiduciary trust obligations. All these things come into play. Section 9124 of the B&A Act. Federal government's response for Indians and Indian lands. Provinces weren't even around. Why are we dealing with Premier Wynne? Why are we dealing with Premier Brad Wall? They came after treaties. Hear that all the time. It's important because they are, in reality, here. They're part of Canada's Constitution, federal powers, provincial powers. Two governments recognized, ideally someday. Ideally, First Nations governments will eventually become recognized not as a third order, but a first order of government. And then our laws, Creator's Law, will be recognized as well, in addition to common law and civil law. In Canada, you got two systems of law recognized. Common law, in Quebec, les belles provinces de Québec, civil law. Or is it the other way around? No, that's the right way. First Nations law, at some point, will be recognized as well. But I put that in there to show they came after treaties. Okay? And then I put up there this thing called the 1930 Natural Resources Transfer Agreement. What was that? The feds were getting pressure. The federal government of the day in 1928, 29, 1930 were getting pressure from all the other prairie provinces now. They were saying, we want to be like Quebec and Ontario and New Brunswick and Nova Scotia and control all of our resource wealth and provincial boundaries. So, the federal government caved in, passed this 1930 Natural Resources Transfer Agreement. There was no consultation or consent by Indigenous peoples. It was unilaterally done. How could we stand up and fight that? We were stuck on the res, couldn't leave the res without a permit. Didn't have access to a lawyer. How could we legally challenge it? But it was done in 1930. Depth of a plow, 1930, everything over to provincial governments, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta. Unilaterally done. Was that sharing? Was that peaceful coexistence? Was that mutual benefit? And the 1930 NRTA was subject to existing trusts. Subject to existing trusts. So we always point out federal fiduciary trust obligations of the Crown. Fiduciary trust obligations of the Crown. Very high up relationship. Did they breach their trust obligations in 1930? I say yes. 1982, Canada cut the umbilical cord to Britain. Patriation of the Constitution. Some of you guys remember that? I remember that. And then there was Indians outside protesting and lobbying. Don't do it. You're going to weaken our treaty with the Imperial Crown. Remember Lord Denning? Lord Denning's decision? A bunch of, why I was still, where was I? I was in school. 1982, I was in university. They patriated the Constitution. 1982, Section 35 in Canada's Constitution. Existing Aboriginal treaty rights are recognized and affirmed. Existing Aboriginal treaty rights. Full box of rights or empty box of rights? What process do we utilize to fill up that box of rights? Do we have a treaty right to post-secondary? You Indians get everything for free. How come? No. When is enough enough? Why can't you be just like us? Wow. Section 25. Why I point that out? There are 10,000 post-secondary students on the wait list to access university training. Way too much. Little Black Bear, we get $80,000 in post-secondary funding. Our population's rising. Can't keep up with the need. I got to take money from my little Tim Hortons gas bar and supplement the post-secondary budget. Because I made the decision as chief, whoever wants to go to school, you're going to school. There's no better way we can get that gap closed than through a good education. And so, if it's a right, the spirit and intent to education, why are there 10,000 students on the wait list? And the spirit and intent, Little Black Bear has promised, Chief, when you are ready to settle down on your reserve, we'll provide a little red brick schoolhouse to you, and we're going to teach you and your children the cunning of the white man. Sounds good, eh? The cunning of the white man. Spirit and intent to a good education It might have been a little red brick schoolhouse in 1874. 2015, we need to go to Trent. That's a good education. That's how we're going to live, how we're going to survive. So the spirit and intent to education. And the treaties. Back to the Constitution Act 1982, Section 35, existing Aboriginal treaty rights. Very important. Full box of rights, empty box of rights. What process do we utilize to fill up that box? And one of the most important rights, the inherent right to self-government. I prefer, I would say, you call a beaver a duck, it still won't fly. Self-determination. The inherent right to self-determination. As Indigenous peoples, as Indigenous nations, we have our own land, our own laws, our own languages, our own identifiable people, identifiable forms of government. 5 things that qualify in international law for the inherent right to self-determination. But again, it doesn't mean anything unless you have economic self-sufficiency. It doesn't mean anything until you start participating in the economy. It doesn't mean anything until you start benefiting from the resource wealth. The gross domestic product, and it's billions, have been generated from the land and resource wealth. And if it's billions, we're still 63rd. And everybody else is 6th. I'm going to keep coming back to that. Constitution. Now, Supreme Court rulings, 1997. So in Canada, you know, there's 3 branches of government. Judicial branch, the Supreme Court of Canada. The legislative branch, the executive branch. You know, 3 branches. We're saying, and I say, why don't the legislative and the executive branch of government start listening to the judicial branch, which is the highest court in Canada, the Supreme Court of Canada, and start getting your laws and your policies in line with what your Supreme Court is saying. The judicial branch is saying very clearly, in Delgamuuk, 1997, Aboriginal rights and title, recognition of that. But more importantly, elders' oral history and evidence is admissible as evidence. So all those elders' oral history and the teachings is admissible as evidence in this Muniao court over here. The Supreme Court. Very important case. And there's been a lot of cases that have been won in Indigenous people's favor in the Supreme Court. But then nothing changes. The legislation doesn't change. The policies don't change. So we've got to work together to get government to start listening to their own Supreme Court. And the Delgamuuk was just the start of it. Remember the Marshall decision? Supreme Court decision. Treaty Indians of the Mi'kmaq out on the East Coast have a right to the fishery. But oh, there's a big furor and an uproar and whoa, whoa, whoa. The Supreme Court made a caveat. Only a moderate livelihood, you Indians. First time ever the Supreme Court on the Marshall decision. You can Google that. Or research it, whatever. First time ever, Marshall decision. So Delgamuuk, Marshall, Siwi, Sparrow, Girin, all these cases, the call it, are starting to move. Aboriginal title and rights is starting to get recognized. A good thing. The Haida. I want to go to that one. What's that one? Oh. I'm trying to find that one clause. This one here. I talked about the NRTA subject to trust, but in Horseman, Justice Corey, when was talking about this piece, Supreme Court judge, although it might well be politically and morally unacceptable in today's climate to take such a step as that settled in the 1930 agreement without consultation with and concurrence of the native people affected, nonetheless the power of the federal government is unilaterally make such modifications unquestioned and hasn't been challenged in this case. So why I put that in there, when the Supreme Court and all these judges are doing these things, it left a little bit of a window on the NRTA. That the authority of the federal government, did they have the authority? Did they have the power to unilaterally make this change? Nobody's questioned it yet. So, all of this stuff going forward, and this is the past, present. We're going to get to the future here pretty quick. All of these cases, Haida, the Mikisew Cree case in 2005, because Haida and Taku River Tlingit, first Supreme Court decisions, and then the Mikisew Cree in Treaty 8 Alberta, came on. It's exactly the same principles. Title and rights recognized, duty for consultation and consent of the Crown. And I put this in here, the 2007, the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And that was a big day for us. It was a big day for Indigenous peoples throughout the world. A declaration was passed regarding our rights. Very important one. And some of you might remember, initially there was 5. That's good. That's power. There was 5 countries that didn't endorse the UN Declaration. You remember them? Yeah. Canada, USA, Australia, New Zealand. They didn't endorse it. Took some time. Took a little coaxing. They eventually did endorse it, right? But it's sad. Even this September at the WCIP, the World Conference on Indigenous Peoples in New York, when all the countries of the world came together with the indigenous peoples of the world, the Maori, the indigenous people from Hawaii, from all over, the Sami people, we all got together and said, hey, we need an outcome document, to help implement and put pressure on nation states to make this aspirational document a reality. And that's the quote from Canada. They view it as an aspirational document. We don't, no. It's bare minimums and international standards, human rights regarding Indigenous peoples. The last couple of years, people were working on this outcome document. And it was presented and unanimously endorsed in New York in September. One country made a caveat. One country stood up and embarrassed itself in the international world. And it was Canada. So right away, I was there. I changed my statement the next day. And I called them on it. I basically said, Canada, how can you disagree with your own Supreme Court in, you don't have it on here, but in the Williams case, in the Chilcotin decision that just came down in June. Remember this? That decision came down in June. The Supreme Court recognized Aboriginal rights and title. And Aboriginal people have the right to use the land and benefit from the land. So how can they get up and say they don't agree with free, prior, informed consent or the sharing of the land and resource wealth? How can they get up as a nation state and not listen to their own Supreme Court? How can they not follow their own constitution? We should play the video for you sometime, but that's another story. Val's got the video at the UN. And I didn't know, I was reading my statement. I got a little bit of an ovation, yeah. and only because Canada cannot continue to do that on the world scene. It embarrasses themselves. Like they're supposed to be promoters, protectors of human rights, fundamental human rights. And they had a golden opportunity to champion that. And they missed it. Even in fact, that our relationship now as Indigenous peoples with the nation state is so unnecessarily confrontational. Unnecessarily confrontational. The UN Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples even put that in his report, James Anaya. It's unnecessarily confrontational. $106 million the federal government spent fighting inherent in Aboriginal rights and treaty rights. That's what they spend on lawyers. Why do that? That's a lot of housing. That's a lot of safe shelters. That's a lot of access to potable water and infrastructure. If they would just start embracing inherent rights, Aboriginal rights, and treaty, it's good for everybody. It would save everything. So, this is a little bit of that timeline, the history, and I'm trying to demonstrate to you all that there is a constitutional, legal, and moral obligation to start dealing with this concept called revenue sharing, benefit sharing. We're to peacefully coexist peaceful coexistence and mutual respect between our peoples, our nations, to mutually benefit from the land and resource wealth. 63rd. 6 and 63rd. I'm going to keep saying that. Just think what this country would look like if we went up to 60, to 50, to 45. Just think of the return on investment. Just think if you put more schools, more adequate teacher salaries and resources in play, that these young First Nations men and women, these kids, these special children, what a huge return on investment. What a huge return. So, there is a historical, legal, moral obligation of the Crown to deal with our rights. And we don't want it all. It's to share, mutually benefit. The Chilcotin case, June. Chief Roger William, our champion, our hero, our warrior, 25 years fighting in the legal system. This decision came down. That was a big day for everybody. Glorious day. He had an elders caravan come from BC all the way to Ottawa. We hosted them in Treaty 4 territory going. We hosted them coming back. And it was just a very, very special gathering. And it was so important how they did it. And it was no wonder it came out in a successful way for the Chilcotin Nation. They had language. They had ceremony. They had the drummers. They had their youth. They had their women. They had their men elders. They had everything was ceremony. And why I stress the importance again, remember I said language so key? Remember the 5 elements? Land, language, laws, people, government. The language is gone. How do I know your Odawa? How do I know your Ojibwe? How do I know your Nehiyawak? How do I know your Nakota? How do I know your Denisontlin? How do I know your Blackfoot? Coast Salish? You'll get sucked up into the fabric. And that's a big thing. That's a big fear. Because even in ceremony, the connection, the world, the creation story, all of our lodges, all of our songs are based in your language. It's so fundamental to our existence as Indigenous peoples. And the Chilcotin had all those elements. And this is really key now, because I say with the Chilcotin decision, with the Chilcotin case, the Williams decision in June, we have a big arrow in our quiver now. And how do we use it? In a respectful way, in a good way, so that we can close that gap, so that we can create economic certainty, so that we can create economic stability in every provincial territory, with the full inclusion of Indigenous peoples because of that Chilcotin case. We need to be part of that economic table. We want jobs for our people. We want to create wealth for our people. But as well, if we're here, we also bring the added element of respect for the land and water. So it's value added. Developing long-term sustainable economic development strategies between Indigenous nations, with industry, provincial governments. There's got to be tables and processes in every province to do that. So I want each and every one of you to phone and write your premiers and your local member of parliament to say, this is a good idea, Premier. Hey, local member of parliament, this is a good idea. Get involved. Make sure there is a process in Ontario Premier Wynne to involve the Indigenous peoples from the Ring of Fire in the north to the south, to the east, to the west. They can only do it as a provincial territory. The federal government can help coordinate. AFN can help coordinate. We can't do it as AFN. But I'm meeting with each of the premiers. They have this thing called COF. Not at the doctor shop, but COF, Council of the Federation. And they meet every July. So part of my 100-day plan as National Chief is to meet with all the national leaders, meet with all the premiers, meet with industry leaders, and encourage them, because of what we just went through in the last 45 minutes here about constitutional, legal, historical, moral obligations to set up those processes to create economic stability and economic certainty with full inclusion of Indigenous peoples, and start that work sooner than later. Closing the gap. Closing the gap. So these bullets here are straightforward. That it's not only restricted to a postage-size stamp in Chilcotin territory, because that's what some people thought. Oh, we had a village over here, so this is just our Aboriginal title. It's expanded. It's expanded bigger. Even in our territory, Little Black Bear, I don't view it as federal crown land set aside for the use and benefit of Indians. That's the legal term. Crown land. It's set aside for the use and benefit of Indians. And Cree is skunagun. It's almost like lands left over. Like if they took all the good stuff and left us there, the crappy piece over here. It's skunagun. Lands reserved, set aside. But we view it as sovereign land, where we'll keep our laws and our practices, tradition. But now, the challenge becomes exerting our jurisdiction beyond this skunigun throughout traditional territory, throughout Treaty 4 territory. So to the tribes here, how are they exerting their territory beyond the reserve boundaries, to your ancestral lands, throughout your whole territory? That's the big challenge. And so with this court case, it means it's not just a little piece. It's enlarged. The scope's enlarged. So there's three things. Duty to consult and accommodate. Duty to consult and accommodate. Who has that obligation? Is it industry or the Crown? It's the Crown. So both levels of government, crowns, where is their policy, where is their framework to ensure that there's adequate duty to consult and accommodation processes in place? This government has contracted a gentleman named Doug Aford. Minister Bernie Valcourt has contracted him. He's coming up with a report. He's been gone out across Canada. He's dealing with the pipelines coming across, dealing with the liquefied natural gas in northern BC, dealing with the east-west pipelines, dealing with the mining issues, trying to get his head around the Chilcotin case. And what's he going to be recommending? We talked to him last week, said, hey, Doug, the Crown has a duty to consult. We're different as Indigenous peoples. We're not just fishermen groups or hunting groups. We have Section 35 rights. Nobody else has Section 35 rights. So you need a separate process for Section 35 rights holders. So you need to make sure this duty to consult and accommodate is put in place. Because if you don't do it, there's going to be legal challenges. And there will be, to protect our inherent rights, our Aboriginal rights, to make sure they're respected and honored. So there's three things. This duty to consult and accommodate. The honor of the Crown is key. The honor of the Crown. Our relationship as Indigenous peoples is with the Crown. And I always say in a respectful way, I have not yet seen a legal argument or the legal basis for the Crown's perceived acquirement of title. I haven't seen that yet. But again, I'm not making a big deal about it to create economic uncertainty. But I sure would like a process so Indigenous nations with industry and the can be around that table together to work this out so that we're part of the economic boom, if you will. Part of the economy in a big, meaningful, substantive way. Now, we've talked about the other successful court cases, the long list. We've talked about Haida, the latest one, as well as Chief Cotre from Treaty 8, Mikisew Cree. He recently won. The duty to consult law. The Federal Court of Canada determined that the executive arm of government is responsible for consulting with First Nations on proposed environmental legislation before introducing a bill where it may have a negative impact on treaty rights. That's another big victory for us. Do you remember Bill C-38 and C-45, the omnibus bills? That came about a year or so back. And it made the environmental assessments, the environmental protection of the lands and water were kind of put to the side. And everybody said, hey, that's not acceptable. That helped give birth to the Idle No More movement. And people just said, hey, as Indigenous peoples, we not only have a duty, but it's a responsibility to stand up for the land and water. And so that was born because of Bill C-38, C-45, and the omnibus pieces of legislation. And so what this recent Supreme Court, or this federal court decision said, hey, executive branch, if you're going to introduce any new pieces of legislation, there is that duty to consult because it may impact in a negative way inherent treaty rights, and you can't do that. Very important piece. Now, only a couple more slides, then I'm going to open up for questions. What we're saying here, again, I've talked about the importance of the land and the water. Importance of water. Look at that, isn't that good timing? Nippy, yeah. Oh, that's good. Thank you. And so these points here, when we start talking about this piece on resource revenue sharing, and it's more than just collective or impact benefit agreements. In Saskatchewan, we have a lot of potash in the southern part, in Treaty 4 territory. A lot of uranium in the north. There could be as well the oil and gas tar sands, if you will, in northern Saskatchewan, just like in Fort Mac on the Alberta side. The whole point about it, when I talked about potash, I had the president of BHP come out to Little Black Bear with me and spend a whole day with me. And that, to me, was a positive experience in the sense that they were thinking of putting a potash mine about a half hour away from Little Black Bear. And so I had the president of this multi-billion-dollar company come out to my little reserve and spend the whole day with his management team. So I really indigenized it up. I put a teepee up, buffalo robes, elders, yeah, of course, you know. But we smoked pipe, and we had ceremony. And it was all about relationship building. Relationship building. And we told them, if you're going to come in our territory, respect the land and water. If you're going to dig beneath that 6 inches, that depth of a plow, have a feast, we'll have a ceremony. To make sure that whatever we do is done in a good way. And so whatever we do with BHP, that my people will have access to jobs, employment opportunities. That we build a relationship together. That you don't just take the resource. And there might be things coming back. Now that's an individual example of whereby companies, whether they be gold, potash, whatever it is, they're doing individual IBAs. And that's all right. I'm talking about a bigger policy piece. In the sense that, like they do in the Northwest Territories, and this is actually happening already. Resource revenue is actually happening in Canada. It's happening in the Northwest Territories. 25% of the royalties that are generated from the natural resource wealth go back out to the Indigenous nations. Quebec, La Belle Province de Quebec, they set up 2 tables in Quebec between Premier Couillard and the Indigenous chiefs there. One to deal with duty to consult and accommodate, how to get their heads around that, and resource revenue sharing, how they get their heads around that. So it's happening in NWT, a little bit in Quebec. Going to happen in Ontario soon, hopefully, with all your pressures and your letters and your emails to Premier Wynne and your MPs. Same thing in Saskatchewan, same thing in Alberta, same thing in BC. All in light of Williams. So I'll write, again, I'm trying to show that there is a legal, historical, and moral obligation to look at this new concept. And it's a way to economic prosperity, of closing this gap. It's nothing new. I've talked about it for 25 years. It's just starting to get a little traction. And to our non-Indigenous brothers and sisters, it's like we don't want all of it at all. It's just to share, in a respectful way. And I always say there's been billions upon billions generated in GDP from the land and resource wealth. And all we want is to share, closing the gap. And that's the whole reason for being here tonight, because it was part of my 100-day strategy to meet with the federal leaders I've done, meeting with provincial leaders I've done, and meeting with leaders of the academic university community. Leaders here, because you don't have to be elected to be leaders. So I encourage you to keep going on your path and bring our circle together as Indigenous peoples. And we're all treaty people. That's a big, big statement now. We're all treaty people. It's not just one side. Two parties to the treaty. And we're all supposed to benefit from the land and resource wealth together. I'm going to say that much, and thank you for listening. Écoutez, que ne nas continua. Thank you. John, Provo, there's questions, comments. You're too kind. Thank you so much. Questions, comments? There might be something I missed, or even terminology if you want. We can go into terminology. Go ahead.
Hi there. I'm actually from New Brunswick.
Okay.
And recently they approved so that when they're clear cutting, they can cut up to 200 hectares at a time. And right now, what's happening in New Brunswick, the bears are sleeping and they're dying because they're cutting it all down. Where's the duty to consult here?
No, it's a good point. She raises a good point. In New Brunswick, they're starting to clear cut. And there was no duty to consult. And so that's that whole element again about protecting the land and the water. And to ensure there's something there for future generations. And in my earlier comments, when I was talking about the worldview, like we as Indigenous people don't see color. Like here, there's no white, black, red people. Like we're the two-legged nation, if you will. Our old people never forget the four-legged ones, which she talked about, the bear. And we never forget the ones that swim, the ones that crawl, the ones that fly. They're our relatives. So when we see things like that happening, we go to ceremony. There is a bigger law. There's a bigger law. It's almost like when elders said, we should almost get a huge ceremony day going in Canada. Huge prayer day. Just to recognize again how we're all connected as human beings and how we never forget the four-legged ones. I can feel your pain. So we have to find ways to make sure governments and industry respect that worldview. Respect that. So there's something left for our children and grandchildren. And it just means dialogue. I've always said dialogue is important. And there's three strategies: a legal strategy, a political strategy, on-the-ground political activism. All three need to happen sometimes in concert to bring about change. That's what it takes. It takes those three strategies: legal, political, on-the-ground political activism. Just be strong. Any other questions? Go ahead.
I have more of a comment. Salam. I just want to express my gratitude
Thank you. Thank you. That's very powerful. And that's one of the things we say to people. There's 3 things I'm asking the premiers to do. 3 things. One is what we just talked about. Look at the economy and revenue sharing, not only for the job, but the environment protection as well. The education system, what you talked about. We want to see treaties and inherent rights and Aboriginal rights taught in all the school systems. Not only on reserve, but every school in Ontario. In Saskatchewan, we do that. Every school has to teach treaties from kindergarten to grade 12. You know, that can happen in every province, right? Just think of the grade 1s, you know, and one of the things they say, a promise is a promise. The little kids, eh? And so they're going home to their supper tables and they're educating their moms and dads. Little kids are doing that because it's the educational system now has to teach treaties and Aboriginal inherent rights, but as well we want to incorporate the impacts of the residential schools. You know, that's huge. You know, like, and I say we don't want to live in the past, you know, but let's learn from that and how we heal and move forward. Because let me tell you, that residential school system, it really killed the pride in our people, that nobody wanted to be Indian. We were ashamed to be Indians. Like, I use that word because Treaty Indian, you know, in the Indian Act, we can use it, I could be First Nation, but it's there. That we come back to terminology again. But there was, nobody wanted to feel good about being Indian. Because everything taught in the residential school, it's no good to be Indian. It's no good. It was civilize the Indians, assimilate the Indians, terminate the Indians, and now it's integration. And I would say integration can work both ways. If we had a school on Black Bear, I'd love those Ukrainian kids from Good Eve to come to Black Bear and learn. And learn with the pipe and the sweet grass, all that. It can work both ways. Just think what a beautiful, great society that would be, eh? I love Ukrainian food and potash. Anything else? Go ahead. And then.
I'm curious, do you have any plans or goals to encourage like engaged Indigenous youth, like especially like urban Indigenous youth in the AFN? Like, I mean,
Good question.
USDBC talking about it recently, and like they were talking about whether the AFN is relevant to Indigenous youth. So, do you have goals or plans to engage Indigenous youth?
Youth council. We have a youth council as part of our charter, and we got to do more, no question. You know, because the fastest growing segment of Canada is young youth. You know, and the youth suicides are high. We got to reach out and get them involved more. And we can use technology. We can use this Facebook and all that stuff. We have a AFN Youth Council. You know, and so we have the voice of the young men, the young women, sit with us as an AFN executive and help make decisions. We also have the Women's Council rep and the Elders Council rep. But we need to keep doing more. So it's a good point. And with the resources, I would say we need to identify adequate human resources to reach out. But sometimes if we don't have these human resources, we have to be creative. You know, and that's where technology comes in. You know, Facebook, Twitter, and I'm kind of getting kind of good at it a little bit. But that's how we're going to try to reach out because it's important. They need to feel part of the system.
Can you articulate how, in the same light, can you articulate how resource sharing will make, I'm also from Saskatchewan, from Treaty 6 territory, my family, Philip Ledoux is my uncle.
Mr. Wasses. Yeah.
But, I know the realities of living on the reserve, particularly out west, and I know the realities of family members who are still struggling. Can you articulate maybe how resource sharing or what you see as moving into the future can concretely help address some of the issues, such as youth suicide, such as addiction, such as violence against women? How does that connect to our day-to-day realities?
Good question. How that'll help? There'll be adequate financial resources because the 2% cap's been there for 20 years out in the communities. So you never keep up with housing, never keep up with education, never keep up with the safe shelters or the daycares that are needed or the Head Start that's needed. So by getting the adequate financial resources in place, the leadership should have enough resources to allocate to these other areas. So that's how it'll concrete help because there's just not enough resources there. So that's how it'll benefit to help close the gap. As long as they're used in that effective and efficient way. You know, that's how I see it. Go ahead.
Thanks so much for coming. I'm an alumni of Trent University. Someone who's traveling from this
Hmm.
So we have to start looking at it that way also, is how do we get people that feel that there's not going to be a trust broken and that confidentiality won't be broken and that family feuds that exist and all of those other things that the hurdles are that continue to come in front of these arenas.
Good question, and like I say, I've been in the community, and every reserve is divided. There's always an us and a them on most reserves, and even on council, I used to, because in Saskatchewan, we used to have the chiefs and councils that vote for the FSIN chief, and I was FSIN chief for 7-8 years. And I used to, well, if this chief doesn't support me, I know 3 of his councillors that do. So I'm going to go meet these councils, because that's how they voted back in the region. Then we used to have a rep by pop. For every 500 people in your band, you get an extra vote, right? So LaRonge, you got 10,000 people. There's 43 voters. I'm going to LaRonge, spending some time up there, right? And so every community is divided. Even councils are divided. And so the simplest way that I can answer it is if we get back to our teachings and our traditions and our ceremonies, and we get back to that, I think that goes a long way. Like even back home on Black Bear, there's divides. My own relatives don't even come out. I got a call from one of my cousins, when I won. Didn't get a call from the chief, but my cousin's on council, because it's jealousy. There's jealousy, and gossip, and we've learned well from that residential school system and lateral violence. The only thing that we can get back to is those ceremonies. And if our people can heal and get back in that pride again, because there is honesty and truth, and there's respect and there's love, there's humbleness, humility, courage, and wisdom. All those things are old people. That's why I say our young people, we need 2 systems of education now to walk in both worlds. You need kindergarten, grade 12, university, technical vocational over here, but this one is equally as important. Your language, your ceremonies, your traditions, who you are, where you come from. You put these together, and hopefully that will take care of that lateral violence. Hopefully that will take care of that gossip, that innuendo. And that's the only thing I can recommend to people, because I've seen that. Like, when I grew up on File Hills Reserves, Kiskimanichi is how we're known. There's Little Black Bear, Okonees, Star Blanket, Pipixis, 4 reserves. We didn't grow up with the Sundance or the Sweats. Like, no disrespect to the churches, good things. Our elders used to say, that was over there for them, and that's a good way. That's their way. The Creator gave them that way. Our elders would say, here's what was given to us. And the old men, they'd hold up their ceremonies, their spog, kask, like the pipe and sweetgrass way. This one is not above this one. And then this one is not above this one. They all go to the Creator. But this is our way. And we have to come back this way again. And I really believe that. There's another hand. One here? Oh, there.
I think I'm just for myself as somebody who's learning to know myself. When we've got these government policies that say, well, first off, we recognize you as an Indian back from Columbus, and the proclamation comes in and says Indian territory. Then all of a sudden, an Indian, you're an Aboriginal. Then from an Aboriginal to a First Nation, now Aborigines. I'm really confused politically and with the policies, and and when we talk about identity and the value of self and what's happening in our communities, and moving forward with certain things such as the Indian Act and the paternalistic point of view that comes from another culture and the dominance of the male over the female and relationships when it comes to the Indian Act stating that he has dominance when it comes to advocacy only 6 months after the fact of union. It's really hard to think about litigation when there's such a dominant structure there. And it almost seems as though the path is leading to an end when it comes to the resilience and the strength of females
Hmm.
in our who we are here.
I have your sympathy.
I think that as much as we can stand to back you up, I think it's important to just come back to ourselves,
Yeah.
who we are.
That's it. No, you're right. You know, and then the words you use, and a little bit on terminology, just quickly. And first is the power of male, female. Like our old people say, the lodge is half male, half female, and you need both for life. You know, and the power, like this water, is so important. And the women's role, like, and that spirit, like there's 4 kinds of water, and the women have a very important role. You know, the salt water, the fresh water, the rainwater, and then the water that breaks at birth. 4 kinds. And the women's spirit is very powerful. I wouldn't do what I'd be able to do without my partner, I tell you. Like, beautiful Ojibwe lady from Nipissing. She's my harshest critic. But it's that strength and balance, and that woman's spirit is strong. And your identity, again, it goes back to who we are as Neheoak peoples. Cree, the 4 direction peoples, or Chenishnabek peoples, the Ongohoe, you know, the Mohawk. It goes by the nations, That's the ideal. But now there's a word called First Nations. You know, it's kind of becoming politically correct, First Nations. But a lot of our people are still covered with Indian, you know, because of what I showed you here. And we're slowly getting better, you know, but because the Indian Act is still here in 2015, it's a legal term. Heck, the Department of Aboriginal Affairs legally should be still called Indian Affairs. They changed the name to Aboriginal Affairs. And we don't like that Aboriginal term, our native, because it's too mixing bowl, right? Indians and Inuit and Métis. So what's really becoming politically correct is First Nations, and you're either a Cree or you're Ojibwe or you're Ongohoe, like, you know, by your nation, are Indigenous peoples now. Indigenous peoples with the 5 elements, right? And then you can break it down to the nations, Cree, so that's kind of where we're going. We're not there yet, but it's going to be a slow process. But your comments are well taken. It's a self, your identity, is very key. And balance. Hands all over. Well, this lady in the front, this lady was first. Yeah, she was beside. No. We're all the 2-leggeds here. Come on. We're on our healing journey. We're in this together.
Excuse me, Rich, for being here and for speaking as you have. I have great-grandchildren, and for them, their future lies in your hands, and people like you. I was in Calgary. I attended the AFN annual meeting when Sean was elected.
In 2009.
Yes, and so I met you then, and I've been watching you very carefully, and I'm so happy with you. I want to ask a question,
Mm-hmm.
and it may not be politically correct for you, and if you
It's okay.
can't answer it, I'll understand. You went to see Stephen Harper the other day.
Yep.
Do you have any idea of whether or not he has any understanding of the things that you've been talking to us about?
I love you. No, it's a good question, and we didn't meet that long. We didn't meet that long to go through all of this. Like my understanding, I talked about the process to try to engage on Bill C-33 in education. We don't like Bill C-33 that it was crafted, you know, and we tried to get him to commit to the ongoing process to close the 43% education gap that exists, the fiscal imbalance, but he wouldn't touch that. I tried to tell him, look, you got a federal budget coming down here in April. Deal with the 2% cap, especially in the area of education. You know, wouldn't touch that. So I raised all the points that I said in the paper. I was pitching, but he wasn't catching. But I'm not going to quit.
No, the newspaper reports they don't tell me that.
Okay.
But I just wanted to know that you are speaking to him in the way you're speaking to
Exactly.
him, but he's not here. It just goes through.
I'm pitching. He wasn't catching.
So we need to go to the 3 years? Is that
Yeah.
the next best hope?
Well, what we need to keep doing is educating. There's a federal election coming up. So making sure everything we talked about is on their agenda somewhere and make that an issue. Make sure missing Indigenous women and girls is an issue, that federal inquiry that's needed. We need that. Make that a priority. Make that an issue. Deal with investments in housing and education to close this gap. That's an issue. Deal with that. Deal with that on your priority platform. So we have a federal election coming up. We can deal with that. And then be open-minded for new concepts to implement treaties, like a treaty commissioner, to implement Section 35, as opposed to going to the court all the time. That's a good thing. Look at ways to close the gap. That's all it means. So making things a political issue. Remember the legal strategy, political strategy, activism. This is a political strategy now with the federal election coming up. Okay? Go ahead. Menanto.
First, I just want to say I'm honored to be here today, listening to you today. You said that word, Skunigan.
Reserves.
Skunigan. And you said you used that word to refer to the reserve. And in my community, Tikamek-Shing, which is the Robinson Huron Treaty,
Mm-hmm.
we have a word similar, Skungigans. And we actually use that word for bacon.
What part of the pig do you get?
Formerly, though, it was a word used when you're making bear medicine.
Yeah.
When you're cooking that bear fat in the, let's say, cast iron pan, and that fat starts to melt, and you have those little bits and they start dancing around the fire. That's what that shpo represents. And what you're left with, you have that powerful medicine, and then you have those little bits. I guess you'd call that the reserve.
It's a good analogy. That's the way we look at it. Yeah.
Similar in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah. So my question was also about Stephen Harper and also Canada, I guess. And you may have just answered it, but it has to do with Canada being the only UN member to reject the landmark Indigenous rights document. I was wondering if you could share some words on that.
Are you talking about the outcome document?
Yeah.
Yeah. No. They made a caveat. Is basically after the vote was done in the UN and everybody endorsed the outcome document, which was a document to help implement the UNDRIP, the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Canada got up and said, "Oh, we want to make a statement. We want to make a caveat." Because within the UN Declaration, there's a clause that speaks to free, prior, and informed consent, FPIC, when dealing with lands and resources. And they were saying, because of the Chilcotin case, because of the Supreme Court decision in June, which respected and recognized Aboriginal rights in title, they wanted to make sure that the world knew that, well, that doesn't mean that the Indians got a veto. That was the word they used. But veto didn't come up at all. But consent and the right to use the land kept coming up in Supreme Court. So that's why I say I had to correct that in a statement. And we can give you the statement that I gave to show you what I said, because it referenced the Supreme Court decision. And I think it was 9 times the Supreme Court recognized rights in title, that they needed Indigenous people's consent, and that we're going to benefit from the land and resource wealth. So it was a key statement. So that's what I said the next day after Canada made their intervention. They made their intervention, I think it was on a Monday, and I spoke on a Tuesday the next morning. Because there's a very big, cumbersome process to get on the speakers list. But as soon as we saw that, all the chiefs that were there kind of swarmed Canada's representative and asked, what the hell's going on? So we did that after she spoke, and we questioned, here's what your Supreme Court said. Why are you doing this? So I corrected that, and we'll get you the statement that I said, because we have it, Valjine, and then we'll show you. So that's what happened. So they're trying to downplay their Supreme Court decision. We have to correct that. Yeah.
Here's a sound of chemists, I'm afraid.
Yeah, we got to get out of here.
And who knows what sort of spray they developed. issues I point to Valerie Galley, who did her MA a number of years ago at the Frost Center and is now a special advisor for the National Chief. So we do have a young Aboriginal first-year student who just would give us a thank you before we leave.
Thought you should sit at the very back. Wasn't the best idea, but I believe we have a slide to remind everybody of the upcoming events. Oh, maybe not. Well, I've shown it earlier. I also have all the information here. So this was the first of 4 talks. And if you are interested, the next talk will be on February 10th with Paul and Jennifer talking about the UN Declaration.
They're good.
Yes.
Paul Joff and Jennifer Preston. They're awesome.
The next one will be February 24th with Ellen Gabriel talking about the Oka crisis. And the final talk will be on March 3rd with Peter Grant talking about Chilcotin and Keewatin. All we have this debate, John and I. I say tomato, tomato, Keewatin, Keewatin, because I am from the area where the Keewatin boat is. So tomato, tomato. We can. But all of these talks are at 7:30 in Bagnani Hall, which is at Trail College on London Street. With all of them, there will be a reception that is afterwards, and everyone is welcome. With that reminder, I do want to conclude with saying the following. I am here as a representative of the Frost Center, currently completing the master's program, but I'm also here as a member of the Métis Nation in Ontario. I'm grateful to you, Chief Bellegarde, for showing us as Indigenous and non-Indigenous people that we can look at the bundle of the resources that we have. These are language, identity, culture, land, family, and community, to name a few. And by participating in a respectful relationship with each other, we can work together to open up what we know about this bundle, question how we can mend the scabs of past legacies that are still present, and prepare this bundle for the next generation. Thank you. Merci. Miigwech.
Thank you so much.
Yes? What? Of you with the provo?
Yeah. No.
No.
If anybody is interested, there's full moon ceremony in the teepee tomorrow night at 7 p.m.
just wasn't sure what was going on. Spinning some proteins around in space, see some different types of bonding. For those of you doing fourth year projects, you might find cool pictures you want to stick in your reports. For other ones that are doing other topics, you may find something of use here. So, when you're in Google, you can put in Protein Data Bank or PDB, and it will bring you to the site. As I was telling the ladies in the front, I have set up an assignment. It goes live at 8:20. With luck, it goes live to this group. If it doesn't, and it goes live later, you have until Friday midnight to complete it. I will let you know what the password is before you leave. If, again, there's problems, then I will figure out technical difficulties, and you will still have not like a 20-minute window. You will have a big window to work on it, because I know you're all busy, and you'll be able to find 20 minutes sometime in the next 3 days. The key concept is if you decide to miss it, and I give a password out, I could, and I let you in with a different password. And so if you try and use this password at a different time, it may not work. There is incentive to coming, I'm hoping. And also you can get it done quickly here, given all the electronics work. So, protein data bank, we're looking at proteins and biomolecules. You can do simple or advanced searches.